Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, taking a quick little detour from the Christmas cards. This is part of Waffle Flower's December release, and as usual, I was 100% into this huge floral stamp from the new Tender Blooms stamp set. Because yeah, because big floral stamps. Must own all of them. So anywho, this stamp is large. This watercolor paper I'm stamping on is 5x7, I think, something like that. It's Strathmore's ready cut watercolor paper, and I'm pretty sure it's 5x7. So I put it in my MISTI, and I'd used my anti-static powder tool first, and I stamped this large stamp with VersaFine Clair Morning Mist ink, which is a gray ink. And I'd used my anti-static powder tool because I coated the image, because this ink dries slowly, coated the image with Wow's Clear Matte Dull embossing powder. Like I always say, it's not necessary. I just like that little bit of a raised edge because it makes my watercoloring easier, because it keeps things kind of contained. And because it's dull, when it's, after it's heated, it doesn't give that shiny finish, which just, again, it just depends on my mood. And I stamped the image in gray this time because, again, I was like, you know what, let's try something different. I was in a soft mood. Whatever that's supposed to mean. So that little doohickey I used when I was stamping is just a whiteboard eraser. I've been showing that in a lot of videos recently, since I got my hands on one, and it just helps kind of glide along the top of the MISTI lid and get a better impression when I'm stamping large images, especially something like this that's quite big and a lot of detail. So this first little bit here is real time, like the stamping and heat embossing was super sped up, and I am speeding this up again here, but for that first little bit, just to show like that's real time. You know, all of this that I'm doing now, I don't color this fast. I don't watercolor this fast. I sometimes wish I could. But like most of this hobby, and even in aspects like this, coloring is therapy. I really like to just sit back. It's usually that I've got, music going or Audible, listening to a book. Still going through the Outlander series again, which I've read. I own all the actual books. But like to listen to that, or Harry Potter, those sorts of things, or movies I've already seen. I can't put TV on very often because more often than not I stop what I'm doing and I'm watching, if it's certain shows, that sort of a thing. But if it's something I've seen, like the Friends episodes, that you've seen like 50 times, I'll let that play in the background too. It's kind of fun to zone out to. But anywho, for the actual watercoloring, I use my Prima Vintage Pastels palette because, like I said, I was in a very soft mood. Very simple watercoloring. Like I'm using just two little brushes here. They're just Nouveau brushes from the same pack that I've been using forever, that I use for my splatter, everything. And one brush I use to pick up the watercolor, and then the other brush is basically just got clean water on it, just to pull the color out a little bit, lighten it up. And that's it. I'm not really doing anything. I will only go in and layer on those little like cone flowers. I'm going to add a little bit more of the yellow after I mix it. But other than that, that's it. I'm not doing any fancy layering or anything. I just went in with each color, did all the greenery first, and then did each kind of type of flower except for that kind of mauvey pink one that I forgot until I had filled in all the other areas. And then added my little flower centers, and then here I'll go in and add that second layer of color with the yellows, and that's it. I'm not doing anything too fancy. Sometimes it's nice to do that. Like I looked at this and I was like, this would look beautiful done in no line coloring, but I don't have the patience for it, and I literally don't have the time, because especially lately with everyone at home, both of us are working from home, the kids, all that stuff. I'm lucky if I can do anything start to finish. It's just is what it is. So anywho, once everything was watercolored, I've, of course, had splatter. Even though this isn't a Christmas card, because that's been my excuse with the last however many videos. I'm like, it's Christmas. I can splatter everything because it's snow. I'm going to come up with an excuse for everything. So I'm adding a bunch of splatter because I just like the texture. I love the dots it adds to watercolor. You can always skip this step if that's not your thing. I really do love it. So off camera there, because I didn't realize the watercolor palette was off camera, all I was doing is just basically kind of rolling the brush in the watercolor and picking up the color and then just splattering a bunch of different colors all over this. And then I got to add some shimmer splatter because that's just what's needed. So I have Ranger's Perfect Pearl Powder. I keep some in a little mini mister bottle with distilled water. So then all I got to do is shake it up really well. And my preferred way of using that, rather than like spraying it or anything, is I shake it up really well and then I just dip my paintbrush in it and splatter that. So after all my splattering, I set that aside. Now I'm working on the background to this card. And I pulled out Bundled Sage, Speckled Egg, Dusty Concord, and Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide inks. And I'm blending them onto Nina Desert Storm cardstock, because that's another thing I'm obsessed with lately. I really like how these inks blend on Desert Storm cardstock. Highly recommend trying it. It's this cardstock part of the reason is because it does have a nice smooth finish, but the other thing is because of that like craft base, it just mutes all the colors a bit. So you do get a different look, and I really love it. And I also really love this color combo. Like, I've been really into, you know, making my Christmas cards and winter things and everything like that. And I could have turned this into a winter card too, but I just really like how these colors blended into each other. And I haven't used Victorian Velvet. It's not a color I reach for very often. And yet again, I pulled it out and I was like, ooh, I like this a lot. And the Bundled Sage. I like all of them. Again, it just depends on my mood. So I did that blend with my blending foams. And then, of course, heavily splattered this background with that Perfect Pearl Powder and water mixture. Very heavily. I can't not. I love it. But I left it that. I could have added white splatter as well because it does add to it. But got all that going. I'm fine with it. So after it had dried, I die cut that piece with the largest of the new Slim Lacy Layers die set from Waffle Flower. There's a whole bunch of fun dies with like scallop edges and stitching and all that fun detail, but I just used the largest one so it gave it that nice stitched edge. And then I used the coordinating die from the Tender Blooms set to die cut this. I've mentioned this before with a lot of Waffle Flowers floral sets, is the coordinating dies are amazing. They cut out like every little teensy bit, you know, in the centers and all that, and I just, it's one of those funny little quirks that I just absolutely love, like love. So I die cut that, set it aside, and I still have that stamp in my MISTI, but there's space, so I just flipped it around because I'm going to use that large floral stamp a couple more times. So I just flip this around and I have a sentiment from the Tender Thoughts set. And I have a little strip of vellum here and I use my anti-static powder tool on that. And I'm just stamping this little sentiment with clear embossing ink. And this one I'm going to emboss with some detail white embossing powder and then melt that with my heat tool. And then I've got my background and my big floral cluster here. And I'm just holding it in place. Normally I would adhere this and then trim off the excess. But I wanted to wrap the sentiment around the flowers, not around the whole thing, if that makes sense. Because I'm going to pop the flowers up with a little bit of foam tape. So I just trimmed off the excess there. And then I can wrap this little piece of vellum that I heat emboss that sentiment right around these flowers. And then I can just flip this over and I'm just going to tape that vellum into place with some washi tape because you're not going to see it. And then once I've got that taped into place, I'm just going to use some thin 3D foam squares to pop this up. Just to give it a little bit of dimension. Not a ton, but it gives it that little bit of shadow that, you know, just gives it a little extra something. So, popped on a whole bunch of little foam squares all over the back of this. And then once I had all of those in place, I'm going to adhere this to my background. And then once that's adhered, just like so, I am going to work on my actual card base, which is more Desert Storm cardstock, of course. And I have my card base is 3.5 inch by 8.5 inch Slimline card. So I cut it at 7, scored it at 3.5. It gives me a 3.5 by 8.5 inch Slimline card. Yes. Anywho, I still have that floral stamp in my MISTI. So this time I'm using it right way up, or what is right way up to me. And I'm inking up the stamp again, but this time with Simon Says Stamps Cobblestone ink. And I have my card base in the MISTI there with, I've folded it inside out, so just the inside of the card is showing. Stamping that big floral stamp with that cobblestone ink onto the inside of the card. I sort like cobblestone ink and the craft cardstock is just meant to be. So I've got that stamped, and then I thought, while I have the stamp out, let's make a little coordinating envelope. So I have one of Simon's cotton candy envelopes, did a little bit of fiddling and realized I want to move that stamp over so that the envelope isn't hanging over right at the very edge of the stamp, if that makes sense. Because it's fine that the envelope's hanging over the edge of the MISTI, but stamping so close to that edge more often than not will cause like smearing, which isn't the end of the world because it's an envelope. You know, they sometimes do get beat up on the way to the destination. But it's just easy to move the stamp over a little bit, and I can move the envelope over a bit. And then I just inked up that stamp with the Victorian Velvet ink. And again, that ink on the cotton candy envelope, just such a pretty combo. And it just got me, my brain just, I was like, more ink blending. Anyway. I took the big stamp out of my MISTI at this point, and I have another sentiment from that Tender Thoughts stamp set, and I'm just stamping it with the Dusty Concord Distress Oxide ink this time, just kind of keeping it a little subtle. So once the inside is done, I can adhere the card front to the card base, and this large wafer die from the Slim LACY layers is the same size as my card base, so 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches. And then to finish off the card, I am just going to add a few of the Waffle Flower enamel dots. And I didn't realize until I was linking that the Stardust ones are no longer available. But you can use any like shimmery, glittery dots, whatever floats your boat. But another thing is there's unicorn color combo dots from Waffle Flower. I will link to those. Those would have been perfect for this. The colors would have been perfect. Like I made do with what I had. I just have the, I'm not even sure what they're called. The Up and Running color combo, which worked. There's like kind of a yellow color that worked really well, and then I used like the purple and I think a pink or something like that. But I'll link to the unicorn pack, because if you want something that goes perfectly with the Prima Vintage Pastels palette, those ones are perfect. I need to order some. Anyway, this card and envelope is now complete. This is part of a blog hop to celebrate this new release. I'll have all that info in my blog post, which will be linked directly below the video, along with all the supplies I use, so you can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I very much appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!